of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. We stand firmly against the war on science that is predicated on the appeal to nature fallacy, which is the belief that whatever is natural must be good and whatever is unnatural must be bad. This belief has become an impediment to advances in areas such as human health, social progress, and even environmental progress. In the field of medicine, the appeal to nature fallacy has already led to catastrophic outcomes. Resistance to vaccines threatens public health and the lives of children. The unwarranted resistance to GMOs has not only held back the fight against climate change, but it has also hampered our ability to feed the developing world as well. Campaigns against GMOs have also held back efforts to ward off the deadly Aedes aegypti mosquito, which has killed countless millions as a carrier of disease and plagues. The scientific consensus concerning the safety of GMOs is solidly supported in every major scientific organization across the planet. The only thing green about being anti-GMO is the extra cash that is made by overcharging for expensive boutique food. But that won't cut it when it comes to raising crops with accelerating heat stress, droughts, floods, disease, and insect infestations brought on by a hotter planet. It makes no sense to accept the call of the IPCC for decarbonization within the next 12 years and yet reject their conclusion that these goals are impossible without nuclear power, which has proven itself to be the cleanest, safest, and most reliable way of achieving decarbonization. It is the most reliable way to decarbonize simply because the alternatives of weather-dependent power sources are inherently unreliable. And nuclear is the cleanest energy source because it is the only form of energy production that completely encases its waste stream. Super safe, advanced Generation 4 reactors, which will almost completely convert existing nuclear waste to centuries worth of energy, are coming very close to commercialization. In fact, it goes completely against most everything we're led to believe, but nuclear is legitimately the safest form of energy generation according to all the accepted worldwide energy fatality data. But there is one thing that nuclear is not safe for, and that is the fossil fuel industry. The fact of the matter is that the fossil fuel industry has a long history of funding the anti-nuclear movement, along with climate change deniers, to protect their bottom line. Solid science is in dire need of a champion, and that is what eco-modernism is all about. Eco-modernism is a new environmental paradigm which looks to reverse the fear of nuclear power and scientific progress in general. Ecology-based modernism is the most direct way to define it. Eco-modernism as a philosophy is described in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto. We believe humanity should not be rejecting technological progress, but rather separate our impacts from nature through the responsible use of technology and urbanization. Urbanization is an unstoppable worldwide trend and the best solution to many environmental problems. It offers sustainable development for the human population and is a historic antidote to both deforestation and species extinction, as humans move away from using wildlife as their protein source. Vertical, urban, high-rise architecture minimizes the use of land, resources, and energy, enabling walkable cities that facilitates the more efficient use of mass public transit as well. It must be emphasized that our support for technological solutions is definitely not about defending industrial polluters. Nor does our defense of technology imply that we just need to sit back and let things take care of themselves. To the contrary, we believe that humanity is at a crossroads that severely threatens our future on this planet. We reject the idea of resource limits on many levels. The advance of science has a long history of getting around problems of resource scarcity and will continue to do so. Another reason is that Earth is just one of a multitude of worlds available to explore in our solar system and beyond. Comets and asteroids are untapped reservoirs for raw materials. If we could find a way to thrive in artificial ecosystems off-world, we could use what we learned to help sustain terrestrial ecosystems here on Earth. I hope by now you understand the worthiness of our cause. Ecomodernism is really only a philosophy at this time. I want to talk to you about the necessity of turning it into a movement, which will be part of the larger environmentalist movement. For it is only through our presence and participation that there can be any hope of moving environmentalism in the right direction. Our aim is not to divide the environmental movement, but rather to multiply its numbers with the incorporation of many scientific and educational communities that is working to both build chapters of eco-modernist societies and support our growth worldwide. We aspire to increase our numbers by bringing together the numerous supporters of climate action that have been alienated by mainstream environmentalism's wildly contradictory support for the shutting down of nuclear power plants in the midst of a climate emergency, and welcome them into our ranks. Thank you.
This show itself is going to be a little different. I'm calling it the Eco-Modernist Soapbox, but it's not about ideas and themes so much. It's just talking with each other about nuclear power, about development, about eco-modernism, environmentalism. We're going to have a requirement for membership that you could come on, and that would involve like just a very low $2 revolving donation in order for you to come on the show and talk with us. And by the way, we could really use the funds. If you like what you're seeing, donate. You won't even miss it. You won't even know. It's like less than a cup of coffee. You got to go to ESNA website. E for Eco-Modernist, S for Society, and North and A America, ESNA.earth. It's pretty easy to remember. Just look on your right side, scroll down just a little bit in the right-hand box. It says donate. It's not a gigantic button, but it's easy to see. And just click on that and give us a little money. Subscribe to the Eco-Modernist channel.
Also to subscribe to us on Twitter and Facebook, Eco-Modernist Society of North America.
And online at https://ESNA.earth. Welcome to the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. We're a modern urbanist environmental organization with a focus on clean energy, housing density, and the application of technology in medicine and agriculture. We are privileged to bring you speakers with a focus on these and other areas in order to show you the future of a prosperous human civilization which preserves the Earth's wild spaces.
across the universe, connecting me and you, connecting me and you, all the way across the universe, all the way across the universe.
Hello and welcome to the Eco-Modernist Channel Live. I'm Carl Pauls. I'm here with Chris Bergen and our special guest, Daniel Chen, who is a nuclear engineer. I think are you a master's or a PhD student? I'm forgetting your
Still
intro.
PhD student.
Great, a PhD student.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
go ahead. I apologize. I flubbed your intro. Anyways, we're here with Daniel Chen once again, and we're going to talk about the issue around, are we actually doing good when we work hard to make these new nuclear technologies that favor the U.S.-dominated fuel cycle? We're talking, of course, about export controls, about the U.S. dominance and which countries get chosen to develop which technologies. Is what we provided to the UAE and Taiwan the formula for the world, or is it keeping countries like Iran under the thumb of U.S. imperialism?
That's a rather broad category of countries, I think.
Oh,
But yeah,
yeah,
we have plenty of time. We might get to talking about them all. So
right.
yeah.
So you sort of chose for your example this time a conversation with David Hess on Twitter, where Kazakhstan had this transitionary phase after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and a lot of their technology was downturned, was phased out because of U.S. influence. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there isn't much to say about it. Basically, and it isn't really, it isn't really entirely the U.S.'s fault with regards to this, I suppose. But essentially, like Kazakhstan, since even before the communist revolution, was, part of Russia, and so it was under Russian imperial control, and then under Soviet control. And it's a great and it's a great place, with lots of uranium, not too many people. The few people that are there, Moscow can choose to not care about. And so it became a pretty good place for Russia. Oh, it's also, miles away from anywhere else, which is great. And so, it became a good place for Russia to put its uranium mines and its, nuclear energy research, both civilian and military, right? And kind of throughout all this, Kazakhstan doesn't have a say in whether it chooses to pursue nuclear energy or not. Kazakhstan does not really have the amount of expertise required to actually, sustain the this very newfangled fast breeder reactor that the Russians are building there. Certainly after the breakup of the Soviet Union, after it declared its independence, Kazakhstan cannot by itself run it. And so, yeah, they chose, and it was also causing a lot of political problems. And so they just chose to get rid of it, and and I guess what kind of irked me and what kind of motivated me wanting to talk about this is the fact that, nuclear experts don't talk about the fact that Kazakhstan never had a say in any of this. They say that, oh, it is such a shame that Kazakhstan decided to abandon nuclear. And it's like, no, that's nothing like that, Why don't we talk about that time when the Marshall Islands decided to abandon its frontier fusion energy research? Do I want to talk more? Do I need to talk more about that, or
do we want to explain the joke?
Oh, okay. I've been told you shouldn't do that, but oh well. So, so after World War II, up until I think it's the early '60s, that don't quote me on this. So, the Marshall Islands were under U.S. occupation because prior to that, they are Japanese colonial holdings. During that period of time, the US got extremely excited because they were going to build a nuclear fusion reactor facility, which is actually a nuclear bomb. It's called Project Ivy Mike. It basically required cryogenic hydrogen to be used as explosive, and it needed an entire factory around it just to keep the hydrogen cryogenic. And well, they detonated the place, and it was frontier fusion energy research in that nobody else has achieved anything like that at the time, right? And of course, mysteriously, after the Marshall Islands became independent, they stopped doing this frontier fusion energy research, and in fact, like the rest of Polynesia, I believe, the Marshall Islands don't particularly look fondly upon nuclear energy, despite the fact that supposedly you'd think that, as one of the countries under existential threat from climate change, you'd think that they would like nuclear, right? Right? Yeah.
well, this is sort of the Oppenheimer factor, is that the U.S. and our military might decides when nuclear technology is beneficial, and when we decide it's not, we make it into an evil, a great thing to be feared. So
Yeah.
it is a technology, and this. Not to be too facetious, I kind of suspected you were going towards, okay, yes, we detonated a bomb over the Marshall Islands, but you're saying they had some facilities there in support of this mission.
Well, yeah. Like essentially, you need you need essentially big Duar jars and cryogenic freezers to keep the liquid hydrogen frozen, right?
And that's on the Marshall Islands territories. It's not something that we did in the U.S. or put it on a boat. It's something that was supported by their local infrastructure.
I mean, that's a bit. The local infrastructure they were able to provide at the time was mostly, the islands. The fact that it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, far away from, I guess, people that Washington would particularly care about.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and those people who worked at those facilities were not necessarily native Marshall Islanders. They were U.S. citizens, U.S. scientists, U.S. military personnel.
yeah.
And when they pulled out, there was no one to run the facilities. The Marshall Islands would have had to hire them back under contract.
Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, the facility itself is a bomb, literally and figuratively. So, there's also the fact that it kind of wasn't there anymore. But yeah, it's kind of like you. I guess sort of to give another example, I suppose, and it's not. I don't think that it is quite as acute as the examples given previously, but still, not many people know that Taiwan actually has the second nuclear transmutation facility built in the world, right? And the hardware is actually the hardware is actually still there for all to see. It is in National Taiwan University, but at the time it was Taihoku Imperial, built by the Japanese, right? And uh, you know, one if you want to be insensitive about these things, you could ask, well, Taiwan also has a legacy in frontier nuclear research. Why does Taiwan not want to build nuclear reactors anymore? And that's kind of an insensitive thing to ask, I think. It's also similar things with there are some people in various places who like the ABWR, the Advanced Boiling Water Reactor, and which is understandable. It's a pretty good design, but there also there aren't too many of them out there. One of the examples of an ABWR is the stricken fourth nuclear plant in Taiwan, and people are asking, how do you convince Taiwan to not give up on frontier nuclear research like this? And I said, that's going to be tricky, And so, just sort of by and large, there is a lot of it's not terribly unique to nuclear, but nuclear has, I guess, unique problems to it, which is that the development of advanced technologies in a lot of places is as a result of past imperialism or other types of injustices. And I think that so nuclear advocacy will do well to, well, first of all, read up on these things, and second of all, kind of respect that,
So when it comes to when it comes to the idea of these developments existing other places, is it letting go of imperialism, or is it shifting it to something like the IAEA? Is the IAEA itself an extension of US imperialism?
Yes. I mean, I guess something that makes me somewhat unique amongst nuclear advocacy, I suppose, is that I really dislike the IAEA. Primarily because, as a Taiwanese, I'm not even allowed to set foot inside IAEA headquarters on a Taiwanese passport. Yet they are allowed to send inspectors whenever the hell they want to inspect Taiwanese plants, which is dumb. But also, apart from that, one of the professors at our department actually works in close collaboration with the IAEA. He kind of mentions that it is interesting that you see the IAEA, their director generals, their various staff members, move in and out. They have a rotating roster of people from various countries all over the world. There is only one office in the IAEA that does not do that. It is sort of mandated almost to be run by Americans, and it is the Human Resources Department.
So we have Americans setting the cultural tone for the IAEA.
Well, yeah. I mean, even with regards to the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, right? That mandates that there are 5 countries, just 5, no more, that are allowed to have nuclear weapons and allowed to do whatever the hell they want. Everybody else, everybody else is supposed to, I guess, partake in the peaceful uses of atomic energy. Only, it's the 5 with the weapons that's allowed to mandate.
Wait, five. Wait, I'm missing something. U.S., Russia, France, England, China.
China. Yes.
Israel. Wait, that's 6.
No,
Israel's not official.
no. Israel is not allowed to. Israel is not allowed to carry nuclear weapons. Neither is India and Pakistan and North Korea, right?
Yeah.
And so, what makes these 5 countries special?
Quick question:
History.
Does
Go ahead.
They are the answer is that they are the UN Permanent Security Council members.
yeah? Are there any Taiwanese citizens who have been hired and worked for the IAEA
No,
over the past
we
three-quarter
are
decades? None at all.
literally not allowed to set foot inside IAEA headquarters.
Oh,
Right.
right, but most of the people working for IAEA don't work at the headquarters. I'm just curious if any had received a paycheck from the IAEA for working other places
Doesn't
at
matter.
any time.
I mean,
Okay.
it's not like it's not like the WHO doesn't leave us out of things, even though there are plenty of ways to let us know. And it screwed the world over. This thing with the WHO did, because Taiwan was one of the first countries to know that, hey, there's this weird pneumonia going on in China. Maybe someone should look at that. And just maybe, if Chinese officials tell you that there isn't human-to-human spread, they might be lying. Yeah.
Oh, imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that. But yeah, it's kind of there is there are mechanisms in the world in place that basically says what that basically says what countries are allowed to do what with respect to nuclear energy, right? And it isn't even as though these restrictions might not make sense, right, in a world that's very different from ours. But but when it is the people who when it's the people who have the nukes that are saying that other people couldn't, that takes on a different character now, doesn't it? Right. I mean, I have been in touch with a very prominent think tank within sort of the U.S. nuclear advocacy space, which I shall not name here. Right? He says that he once told me that he doesn't think that even though he likes nuclear energy, he doesn't think that nuclear energy is suitable for Ghana. And I kind of looked at him and said, that's for Ghana to decide, not for you to dictate. Now, isn't it?
Yeah. This is what I'm on the left. I kind of make this argument is that, well, the motivation for nuclear to succeed in places like Ghana, Ethiopia, is the same argument for how revolution is going to make these countries independent of capitalism. And then if that model of local, independent, self-sustained creative ability is not the future for these countries, then they're vassal states of the US or Russia or China.
Arguably so, right? And it's going to and in many ways, it's like India is India is kind of like revolutionary in terms of the fact that it just decided to throw caution to the wind and grab a nuke, and then everything else worked out for them, right? They also made everything work. They also made things worse for everybody else in doing that. But can you blame them? And I don't think the answer is no. I am somewhat disappointed that India has not, lived up to its thorium dream. But all the same, that's another story for another day, because that's difficult technologically, I guess.
Especially with the pressurized reactors. So I don't believe they've gone very far down the molten salt road. Have they?
No, they haven't. And in fact, uh, it's actually kind of strange, because India has arguably the most well thought out and feasible nuclear development plan of any country. It's just that they haven't actually done it, and it's very frustrating that they haven't done it. But essentially, the old plan for India was that they were going to import CANDUs, essentially, from Canada.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They were first going to have to burn a bunch of natural uranium that they have to source from other countries, because apparently India doesn't have that much uranium. Then they're going to have to dig out the plutonium that's created in the spent fuel, right? To create more fuel that they're going to burn. So they're still dependent on foreign materials, but this is sort of second use foreign materials, I suppose. And then using that plutonium, they are going to start a thorium breeding cycle, and therefore just be completely independent of outside control. And this started very early, arguably before even India actually acquired actual independence.
Like the mid
They
1960s.
realized that, they sort of realized that, to sort of rise above the colonial past, industry is important, energy is important. And well, they, it's a great plan. It doesn't involve technologies and sciences that don't exist or that India couldn't do. It's just that they haven't done it, and it's somewhat frustrating that they haven't. I suppose.
So I'll connect this to something on our show notes. Is you and Nick Turan have both had this conversation about why is the U.S. focused on HALEU, and why is the nuclear industry afraid to say the word plutonium? And it is this non-proliferation position, though TerraPower itself is using the molten chloride reactor. That's not going to be able to be export. That technology, that molten chloride reactor, is U.S. only, right?
The way that I heard it explained to me is that the molten chloride is possibly going to be exported eventually. It's just that the iteration that they are currently building at Idaho National Laboratories is not, because as a cost and counterintuitively safety measure, the reactor is going to have to use bomb grade materials. And by bomb grade materials, I don't even mean plutonium. I mean just straight up 100% pure uranium-235. And there are people who I shall not name inside a very specific nuclear advocacy group, which I shall also not name here, who have said that, but it is sort of the US's responsibility, right, to conduct these experiments with these risky materials so that other countries can enjoy the civilian benefits without incurring risks to themselves. And I said, yeah, there is a term for this sort of thing. It's called the white man's burden. And I don't like it.
That's another sort of Oppenheimer call out. And I think that once I see it, I think there's some analysis there. And there's been a lot of chatter about, Oppenheimer and the Oppenheimer project being another white man's burden, another white savior kind of a project where, okay, we are going to save the world from fascism, and never mind what we do with the world, we are going to be the saviors. And this is the same attitude when it comes to the US and nuclear export. Is it all tied together just that simply?
I mean, it is all tied together. It's not simple by any means.
Okay.
I think that part of it is just that I think there are a lot of I think, very well-meaning people who simply do not know how deep it goes. And as an extension of that, every time I try explaining how deep it goes, it makes me sound like a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. I was since last time we met, I suppose, I was actually in Tennessee attending an ANS student conference, and it is somewhat encouraging, I think, that at least 6 of the students there at the time volunteered 2 hours of their own time each to hear me rant about export controls. And part of the, about half of those 6, I think, were the result of a panel that I attended, which was called which is called Science, Use of Science in Policymaking, which is actually a pretty terrible title. Because what actually transpired was that they had some guy from DOE and some guy from a think tank called the Nuclear Threat Initiative talking nonstop about non-proliferation. And the Nuclear Threat Initiative guy kind of said that, in these trying times, the US needs to maintain its deterrence posture, and at the same time, it needs to lead by example, right? And not use dangerous technologies, even in a civilian context, especially reprocessing. And there was you can almost hear there are students gasping, saying, what? We're not reprocessing, and we're not reprocessing waste. Then why are we pursuing all these advanced reactor technologies, right? And then sort of during the Q&A, I kind of raised the question that you mentioned that the US should lead by example. And I think that's a good sentiment, right? With that in mind, what kind of example do you think the other countries are seeing? Because what it looks like to me as an outsider is a country that is clinging on to its nukes while also mutilating its own civilian program. And that's not non-proliferation. That's almost anti-non-proliferation, And it's interesting because Section 123, quite a lot of the students actually mentioned to me that they definitely remember it being mentioned in classes that they've taken that is related to regulation and non-proliferation and all that. And they didn't pick up on the implications at the time. But now that I've sort of explained it to them, they said, yeah, this is rather weird and kind of off-putting. How is the US going to maintain its technological leadership if that's the case? And I told them, oh, that's the great part. You don't. Right? Right now, there is a lot of excitement in the US specifically with regards to SMR exports, right? And there was this one webinar that I attended where someone asked, Russia and China have been producing, have been offering reactor projects on time and on budget, proven to work, right? Is there concerns about the fact that the US is falling behind? And sort of the host of that the host of that webinar kind of said, no, because you notice that all of these countries have all of these firms are state backed, whereas the US had, and there's only one of them per country, whereas sort of the US has 50 reactor vendors and all of them are private enterprises. And this demonstrates sort of the vibrancy of the US industry in a way. And uh, I sort of, I kind of asked, do you really believe that? Right? Do you really believe that, 50 paper reactor vendors really demonstrates some sort of technological leadership, especially from the view of other countries, right? Because other country, I'm not sure that, say, I don't know, let's say Vietnam is going to be terribly impressed with 50 companies that have like very, very nicely drawn posters of reactors that have never been built yet,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine like 100, 140 years ago, uh, some men come in and say, "We have all these designs for advanced weaponry. We have Gatling guns, machine guns. We have Glocks that can load in from 9 or 13 bullets at once, just put in little modules into it to refire them. You don't have to put bullets in one by one anymore." But we haven't built any yet. Back in the American Civil War times, if someone had said that, it people would say that those are cool ideas, but what good are ideas if you can't show me a finished product that can be mass produced? And possibly we will have 4, 5, or 10 small modular reactor companies producing physical products within 6 years or so. But at the moment, yeah, you're right. They're all paper reactors.
I am somewhat rather more pessimistic about that. So, in many ways, sort of the future of US reactor exports hinges on Canada, interesting right now, because Canada is planning on building, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 BWX 300s at Darlington, right? Now, the thing is, and there are various ways of interpreting this, and I happen to interpret it rather pessimistically. But you know, but Canada's stated rationale for building the SMRs have subtly shifted over the years from because we need them for the oil sands or whatever else to because other people will want them and we want to be the first so we can sell our expertise, right? To now it is essentially to demonstrate to the CNSC, that's the Canadian nuclear regulators, that Ontario Power Generation can still build nuclear reactors, and so they can move on to building CANDUs again at OPG and at Bruce Power Plant, right? And again, I must stress that not everybody interprets it the way I do. I am rather more pessimistic about this, but my interpretation of this has been that in other words, Canada has, in the spur of the moment in the past, decided it wants an SMR, and right now it is trying very hard to come up with excuses for why it did that, and excuses aren't forthcoming. But it also doesn't matter anymore because the general consensus within Canada is to sort of go away from these things anyway, right? And so that is that is an extremely precarious position for US technology exports to be in, right? The fact that you're partnering with a country that it isn't just that Canada needs to demonstrate that these plants can be built and that they work. They also need to deliver on the regulatory and economic promises that SMR vendors have made in the past. And I frankly just don't think that is possible because true to nature, true to form, I suppose, the nuclear industry has very much overpromised and undersold. So, yeah. How did we get here? Uh, yeah, we were talking about the fact that sort of
That
SMRs
SMRs,
are
yeah, they're
unproven
exciting.
and they are not very. They aren't as good of a sales pitch to with regards to U.S. nuclear exports as I think many in the industry likes to pretend that they are, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And about the only export the U.S. currently has is fuel through Westinghouse, is my understanding.
Yeah, which is made using enriched uranium from Russia. So,
Well, yeah,
in
Westinghouse and
part,
Framatome.
yeah,
yeah. I think I read 19% of available uranium fuel, yellow cake type fuel, is out of Russia, but that's still a
yeah.
sizable enough portion to greatly affect the rest of the industry.
I mean, that's in the U.S., right? If we're talking
Well,
globally,
yeah.
then that's like 45%. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. It's like I was actually talking with a friend yesterday, and the subject was on. So he's an interesting fellow, I suppose. Hails from Seattle as well. Currently is in Taiwan doing policy related research. But he was in DC a few about a week ago, and he kind of mentioned that within Washington there is a lot of cautious optimism with regards to with regards to economic decoupling from China. And at the same time, there is also optimism with regards to the fact that if war should arise over the Taiwan Strait, then U.S. allies will help however they can, because if Taiwan was to fall, then the world economy is going to be completely screwed. And I kind of asked him, these things are somewhat contradictory, though, aren't they? On one hand, you're arguing that, decoupling is going to be reasonably easy once everything happens. But on the other hand, the world economy is screwed because Taiwan is apparently so important, right? Unless, of course, you're saying that the US isn't part of the world economy, except that it clearly is. And, and it... I think this is sort of a broader symptom of a problem of the problem regarding sort of export controls with regards to nuclear fuel specifically, I suppose, which is that broadly speaking, the U.S. The U.S. assumes some very dated and therefore dangerous things with regards to how much leadership or primacy it has on things that it kind of doesn't have anymore. And, that I feel is going to screw up the US eventually. But what kind of makes it worse is that before it does that, it's going to screw up a lot of other people first. And it kind of gets me down thinking about that. So
I mean, in the circles here on Twitch, there's a lot of people talking about the fall of the U.S. dollar, the de-dollarization versus how that is backstopped by ideas like the dollar milkshake, where the U.S. dollar sucks up so much of the global economic activity that it simply can't fail. It will extract value from everyone else's currency before it starts to fail. And so the primacy of the U.S. is at same your point of vulnerability, but a lot of people are even those who are betting on the fall of the U.S. financially are finding out ways where we're so interconnected that it is simply like even perhaps interconnected to China, is that China can't afford to break away from the US yet. We have this enormous cultural cachet, this enormous consumer base, and this enormous financial base by which they hold on to power. So we are like two eagles caught in a death grip, plummeting to the ground.
Yeah, and it's sad because it's not just the two eagles that's going to plummet to their dooms. There's going to be a lot of smaller animals, I suppose, cushioning their fall, and it kind of sucks, I guess. One of the other things that my friend and I were talking about yesterday was something called the Jones Act. And I don't know if either of you two know
I'm
what that
familiar with
is.
that, with shipping.
shipping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's like, in many ways, I think it's almost the anti. It's kind of the opposite but the same as Section 123 of the U.S. Atomic Energy Act, in that it instead of restricting foreign actors and foreign markets, is restricting the U.S. actors and U.S. markets almost. But it's also the same in that it arises from the same kinds of attitudes and assumptions about U.S. primacy that just kind of doesn't exist anymore, right?
Right.
It kind of, nearly all countries, I think, to varying degrees, restrict sort of domestic shipping to domestic entities,
Right.
right? And the only thing, the thing that makes the Jones Act so unique is the fact that, in addition to being America owned and American staffed, the ships also need to be American built, right? And in and of itself, like that isn't too much of a stretch either, right? Because this law was written 100 years ago, back when the US built lots and lots of cargo ships, and now the US doesn't build any, basically. Right? And there's still this, and yet there is still this idea that this rule needs to remain in place because it protects US shipbuilding somehow, even though US shipbuilding doesn't exist. And in many ways it's kind of like that with restrictions to export controls as well, right? There is some idea that it is there to protect either US business interests with regards to fuel exports, or to protect US security with regards to restricting bad actors around the world from obtaining nuclear weapons. And except that you scrutinize this further and you'll realize that the domestic fuel cycle chain it's trying to protect barely exists, right? And all the pretty soon all the bad actors around the world are going to acquire nuclear weapons, because US export restrictions on these things manifestly only affect countries that have these kinds of relationships with the US, right? And so
Yeah, and if the
so
US isn't
you're stopping your
producing
friend,
any, then there's no relationship on
yeah,
that
so
level.
basically you're stopping all your friends from getting these technologies you consider questionable. You're not going to be affecting anyone else. So yeah. And
So let me break in and summarize. So the Jones Act means that the U.S. can't ship things to Puerto Rico unless we're using a U.S. company, ship, and a crew. And so whenever Puerto Rico gets hit by a storm, we have this great problem where we don't have enough enough domestic shipping capacity, and so they're hurting for international relief. They're not a international port, and so they don't receive things via international ships. It has to be within the U.S. It's a protection racket because we think we're so powerful. We ought to be producing this stuff and doing it for ourselves. And the analogy to NRCA section 123 is, we think we're so great. Everyone needs to follow our lead, follow our example. And so all those nuclear technology companies must submit to our requirements.
Yeah,
Jones Act was also mainland, not just
in
Puerto Rico. Or something like that.
arguably, sort of the situation with Puerto Rico is almost, it's not protection racket, it's almost an anti-protection racket, right? Like, other countries are allowed to help Puerto Rico if they so choose, right? The US specifically, cannot. So, but yeah, it's kind of, there's a lot of these kind of like dated and and therefore very dangerous assumptions, right? And that's kind of before you get into the I guess sort of the moral implications of these things, right? Which is that, just like from purely a national interest standpoint, these things are bad for the US national interest, right? It's like one of the very understated problems that's happening right now is that the thing about Saudi Arabia that I told you about the first time we talked, it's happening right now, and policymakers in the US are very much stuck about what it is that they can do about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the only sort of somewhat helpful idea that they have is to apparently be even bigger dicks to Iran, so that hopefully Saudi Arabia catches on that the US isn't especially mad at them in comparison. And I'm personally not entirely sure that Saudi Arabia would interpret it that way. So.
Yeah. So let me recap. The Saudis were at risk of collaborating with the Russians to build their reactor tech, and so the U.S. is turning around and relaxing some of our requirements in order to prevent that. Which direction has it shifted? More towards Russia or more towards a lenient U.S. policy?
The answer is frustratingly neither. Right, the sort of vibe I get from these kinds of policy papers that I'm reading right now does appear to be that the US is not going to submit to Saudi Arabian demands for these kinds of things. They sort of hand wave the fact that Saudi can, at the end of the day, just go to Russia to buy their reactors. Russia is not going to sell them centrifuges, I don't think.
Right.
But,
they have owner-operated reactors where Russia ships out the fuel, then they ship the used fuel back.
Yeah, so Russia is not going to give them centrifuges, but Russia is also not going to stop Saudi Arabia from building their own, which is a sweeter deal. Which is a sweeter deal than what the US have. Right, which is that there are 50 paper reactor vendors willing to build whatever it is you want.
Does Saudi Arabia have source material to use in the centrifuges?
That I don't know, and to be quite honest, I also kind of don't care.
Fair enough.
I am not terribly, I don't possess all that much fondness for Saudi Arabia. It's just something I kind of brought up because, it's a dilemma that the US had, and it's something, it's a dilemma that needn't have happened if, I don't know. Sometimes what I say kind of get mischaracterized as sort of the U.S. using nuclear trade and nuclear cooperation as leverage for influencing the politics of foreign countries, and that I mean that does happen. It's not necessarily what I take issue with, right? I think that if the US told Saudi Arabia that, fix your women's rights issues and then we can talk about building the centrifuge, that's not necessarily such a bad thing, but that's also not what's happening. Right? And what's happening is that essentially, things like building, things like enriching uranium have within the international community become a more objective evil than treating women and children and foreigners like crap inside authoritarian states. And like even this absurdity isn't even distributed evenly, right? Not even amongst authoritarian states. One of the things I was complaining about before the show started was the fact that when I proposed that Taiwan should be allowed to enrich its own fuel, there are plenty of people who say that, oh, Taiwan shouldn't because that causes proliferation concerns. And yet, when I sort of share news about the fact that Russia is now shipping reactor grade plutonium to China, ostensibly so that China can start a breeding program, but you don't actually know why they did this in times like this. I share that news, and then the same people say, "How dare you insinuate that China can build nuclear weapons out of reactor grade plutonium?" And
Of course they can.
what?
Of course
they can.
Yeah.
I mean, of course they can, right? And it's and it's like I like especially among sort of the more technologically inclined people, right? I get accused of spreading I get accused of spreading false narratives and false information when I say things like that, and I'm thinking, first of all, I'm as much of an expert on these things as you are. I am, I am in school studying these kinds of things. But also, second of all, just like this is not really a technical issue anyway, right?
Well,
whether
way.
countries, how countries choose to use technologies and materials at their disposal is fundamentally not a technical question. Right.
Yeah.
So let's interrogate that a bit. What is the narrative by some of the more ardently pro-nuclear folks is that, well, proliferation is a total non-issue, and if you're trading plutonium from a reactor, that makes a terrible bomb that no one would possibly want to use. But
Yes.
we don't know that for certain, right? Or is this?
I mean,
go ahead.
There are technological reasons to believe that it is not. Let's just say it's not the best way to get nuclear weapons, right? And there's definitely some truth to the fact that that China probably isn't going to be using those materials to increase its nuclear arsenal, right? At the same time, and this is what really gets to me, is that these same people will claim that South Korea experimenting in electrochemical reprocessing, or Taiwan getting its own enrichment plant, that is to be treated as a proliferation threat with absolute certainty. And basically, that doesn't make sense, or it kind of does, and it's it's weird and stupid and frustrating. But kind of the idea is that it's technically not proliferation if China gets more nukes anyway, because China already has nukes, right? And
A lot of nukes.
and like I suppose logically that makes sense, but from sort of like sort of from a more sort of political or sort of game theory standpoint, right? What is this trying to say? Are you saying that therefore we need to essentially reward China for bad behavior, right? you know, they already have nuclear weapons, ergo, it doesn't matter if they do these bad things, that we don't allow other countries to do it anymore, and it's sort of the same kind of dynamic with regards to places like India and Pakistan specifically, I guess. And which is that India got India was heavily sanctioned in the late 60s, early 70s, because it refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Then they actually got a nuclear weapon, and then everything worked out well for them, right? The sanctions stopped, the sanctions stopped. They managed to get a cooperation agreement signed with the U.S. The U.S. is even trying to get them into what's known as the Nuclear Suppliers Group now, right? And it essentially just like the non-proliferation is a system that rewards rule breakers, essentially, especially if you broke them first. And it's got to stop. And I think that, and I think that it is like, it is important, I think, that people sort of knowledgeable about policy and about technological stuff speak up about these kinds of things. But of course, those people are also the people who are not going to speak up, because honestly, I don't know. Like, what is the risk to people like Nick Turon if they go on Twitter and say that, the current non-proliferation regime is not, it's not working out and we need to abandon it, or export controls are silly, Taiwan should be able to enrich and reprocess uranium and plutonium.
Well, this is,
I don't know.
Yeah, this is the number one rule that I learned in entertainment was you don't make news. That's for the bosses to decide when we're allowed to make news. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, who's Nick? But who's Nick Turon's boss in this context?
Bill Gates.
4 levels up, 5 levels up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But yeah, right. I keep getting told that I shouldn't be too harsh on these people because they do not affect policy. And my response to that is, well, if they're not affecting policy, then they shouldn't be speaking up so loudly about nuclear disinformation either, because they're not affecting policy. Right?
Oof,
At the same time, I think some of them could. I think some of them could affect policy by speaking behind closed doors to the right people and lending their voice. And if multiple people lend their voice, then they could affect the policy.
I don't even think that they need to speak behind closed doors. They should speak. They should speak in front of it. Like I have I was in conversation with guess I shouldn't be naming names, so I wouldn't start now. But yeah, it is made known to me that sort of within sort of the more technically inclined people in Washington, within sort of policymaking circles, there is an understanding that current export regimes are very much hurting the U.S. industry, there is understanding that current non-proliferation thinking is based on very outdated ideas about what the US can and cannot do within the international space right now. There is understanding that radical changes are needed very soon, or else a lot of people are going to be extremely screwed, right? There is all these very interesting sort of under the table discussions about these things. And my experience while I was in Tennessee is that these people can be honest, but you need to know where to poke them, and you need to poke them hard enough. But the frustrating thing is that all of this is happening under the table, and I honestly think half of our problems would end if people just said these things out loud, right?
Okay, sure.
The thing that I have said to various people I will name names this time because I think this is reasonably okay, in Generation Atomic, is that if we allow sort of senators and people in think tanks to if like senators and people in think tanks are sounding like are sounding like radicals, then advocacy has failed at its job, right? Because advocacy are supposed to be the highly idealistic and somewhat stupid people who yell at the top of their voices about what their ideal state of the world is, so that people in think tanks and actual policymakers sound smart and think and sound like they know what they're talking about in comparison, and that isn't happening, right? We now have we now apparently, so I've been told, there are senators inside U.S. Congress who are talking somewhat seriously about wanting the NRC to be abolished, right? And
Yeah.
Is that going to happen? Probably not, right? but the fact that a lot of advocates are so freaked out about sounding like idiots if they say that the NRC should be abolished, right, is in my opinion sort of part of the problem, and why it isn't going to happen, right?
Wow. So this is maybe this is a good point to stop. We've had a great chat, and unfortunately my time is going to run out. So
Yeah.
this is a bit revealing. Is Daniel Chen has faced the iron ceiling of not being allowed to progress policy wise in the IAEA, so he can tell us all these things. Why there you don't have anything to risk, and so you can give us all the dirt. And that's a
good way of putting it. Yeah.
So the bad boy of nuclear policy, Daniel Chen, has joined us again here on the Eco-Modernist channel live. You can catch our broadcasts at 11 a.m. Pacific or 2 p.m. Eastern every Sunday here on Twitch at Soyaddle, on the Eco-Modernist channel on YouTube, on Facebook at the Eco-Modernist Society of North America, and find all these links at our website, ESNA.earth. That's ESNA.earth. Thanks for your input, Daniel. Thanks, chat, for sticking around and enjoying this sort of, the crossroads of advocacy here. And remember, emissions first, peace and justice will follow.
I want to speak to you about a new organization called the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new Environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. Ecomodernism is a new environmental paradigm which looks to reverse the fear of nuclear power and scientific progress in general. Ecology-based modernism is the most direct way to define it. Ecomodernism as a philosophy is described in the Ecomodernist Manifesto. We believe humanity should not be rejecting technological progress, but rather separate our impacts from nature through the responsible use of technology and urbanization. Urbanization is an unstoppable worldwide trend and the best solution to many environmental problems. It offers sustainable development for the human population and is a historic antidote to both deforestation and species extinction as humans move away from using wildlife as their protein source. Vertical, urban, high-rise architecture minimizes the use of land, resources, and energy, enabling walkable cities that facilitates the more efficient use of mass public transit as well. It must be emphasized that our support for technological solutions is definitely not about defending industrial polluters, nor does our defense of technology imply that we just need to sit back and let things take care of themselves. To the contrary, we believe that humanity is at a crossroads that severely threatens our future on this planet. I hope by now you understand the worthiness of our cause. Ecomodernism is really only a philosophy at this time. I want to talk to you about the necessity of turning it into a movement, which will be part of the larger environmentalist movement. For it is only through our presence and participation that there can be any hope of moving environmentalism in the right direction. Our aim is not to divide the environmental movement, but rather to multiply its numbers with the incorporation of many scientific and educational communities that is working to both build chapters of eco-modernist societies and support our growth worldwide.